morning, everyone. Who knows if it's morning when you're watching this, but welcome to another one of our conversations here with Dan. It's our first recording of the new year.
Happy New Year.
2020 is here. I know. All right, so as always, we want to remind everyone that we appreciate your comments, your questions that keep coming in. We just ask, keep sharing this, keep liking it on Facebook, on YouTube. If you have a moment to give us a review, either on Facebook or through our various podcast sites, that always helps people find these videos. And so we just take a minute, share, review. That'd be great. But now for our question. Dan's going to get to that faster.
Una pregunta para hoy.
Sí. All right, here we go. It says, in Genesis, there are stories that include what could be viewed as impossible today. A talking snake in the Garden of Eden eating a fruit acknowledging knowledge, and the repopulation of the earth through a handful of people after a flood are just a few of these examples. Now, Jesus often uses stories to illustrate a point. Could these be the same category as a means of displaying the nature of God to the Israelites? If these are simply stories to illustrate a point, instead of a literal historical information, would the Christian faith be any less meaningful?
Wow.
There's a lot going on in that question.
That is a very good question and probably reflects the questions in a lot of people's minds. So basically what I get from that question is, should we consider the miraculous things that are told in the Old Testament and New as historical, or are they mythical and stories like parables to make a point, basically? Yeah,
and I think specifically, like if you take the creation story as non-literal, does that diminish, if you take it as maybe Moses telling a story to the people, does that diminish the rest of your Christian faith?
Well, the short answer is yes. And I guess it would be because the Bible tells these things as historical events. And let's just talk about that for just a moment. There are other ancient creation stories that are extremely different than the biblical creation story. And the biblical creation story in a polytheistic or many-gods world is a very different monotheistic story, meaning there's one God, and this one God is not in the midst of chaos that produces the creation, but this one God is very purposeful and methodical, and there's a moral judgment made on the creation that everything he did was good. So at least you can say that the biblical creation story is unique. But once you pass the creation story, of course, as the questioner pointed out, there are all kinds of other things that you get into that are also supernatural. From, in Moses' same work of the Pentateuch, you've got burning bushes, and you've got angels visiting people, and you've got God's supposed destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and you've got the parting of the Red Sea, and all those
flood,
things.
like he points out in the question.
And the flood, yes. So are these things historical? I think we have to go back to first the fact that the Bible does present them as historical. And secondly, the idea that there are lots of things that tie the Bible to history. For example, the story of Abraham is tied to customs of that day and that are reflected in the story. Are those really legitimate customs from the 18th century BC? Well, the Mari and Nuzi archaeological finds.
Let's say that one again.
Mari, M-A-R-I, Nuzi, N-U-Z-I.
Okay.
These are archaeological finds from Mesopotamia, and those tablets that were found there reflect the exact same kind of customs as you find in the story of Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and Isaac and inheritance policies and all those things. It seems to very accurately reflect that time period of history. The places in Genesis and Exodus are real places. The people, the Hittites that Abraham bought the tomb for his wife to be buried in the cave of Machpelah. Many years ago, archaeologists said, well, there's no such thing as the Hittites, and then they kept digging all over that part of the world, and there were Hittites all over the place. So these things are historical.
Yeah, so there is some historical thing there, but let's go back and just think specifically about the creation story and the flood story, kind of predating those. You know, the questioner points out that Jesus does tell a lot of illustrative stories. Could these two situations specifically be illustrative stories for Moses teaching the Israelites coming out of this polytheistic society and all this?
No, I don't think so. One of the reasons is that the flood story is in different cultures all over the world. And not only is it in different cultures, Whitcomb and Morris many years ago wrote a book called The Genesis Flood and explored archaeological and geological evidence for the Great Flood and all over the world. So there really appears to have been a flood that was a historical event, and it was cataclysmic.
Yeah.
And so there's no reason to think that wasn't historical. If God can put a baby in the womb of a virgin without a man.
Now we're jumping ahead on that
we
one.
may be, but it's the same thing. If God can put a baby in the womb of a virgin, and if God can raise bodily a Jesus from the dead, then God can do the things that it says in Genesis and Exodus and all those other places in the Old Testament. So,
but what about the talking snake?
The talking snake is just another example. You got the talking donkey.
I was going to say there's a talking donkey later on,
in the book of Numbers with Balaam. And the idea is that God used whoever and whatever he wanted to use at different times. The Bible teaches that demons can inhabit animals. And, you know, when the demons were cast out in Mark chapter 5, where were they put?
Into the pigs.
They're exactly right. So if a demon can be cast into a pig, I guess he could be in a snake as well. The Bible believes in supernatural things, and I think we need to go back to our beginning assumptions of philosophy. Years ago, I took a course from an old brother named J.D. Thomas, and it was an introduction to philosophy. And he said, okay, we got to start here. Ontology, what is real? Some people are materialists, and they believe that only matter is real. Because they can feel it, they can see it, they can touch it, they can taste it, they can smell it. So they have limited their scope of investigation to the five senses, and they say, therefore, only matter is real. But on the other side, there are people that say, no, there are other realities that aren't material, like beauty. Beauty is real. Truth is real and not just relative. Love is real. They say the human spirit is real. And of course you can't see the human spirit. But anybody that's ever been in a room with somebody that died can see that something left that person. Now, was it just biological function, or was there something else? There's all kinds of evidence in Scripture that points us toward the supernatural. But one thing that old brother J.D. Thomas taught us was that once you have your alternatives of are ideas real or are material things real, you have to choose one of those. Well, how do you know anything? Well, that's the next step, is epistemology. How do you know anything? One of the steps toward knowing things is empirical research, what you can feel, observe, and you can go so far with that. Another step is testimony. Do we believe in testimony? Like if there's a whole bunch of different people that aren't connected that testify to the same thing, is that really strong? It's corroborated, Is that really strong? Well, we've sent people to death row for that. And how do we know there was a Gettysburg Address?
Mm-hmm.
How do we know that there was never an Abraham Lincoln that was president? Only by testimony, human testimony.
Yeah.
So we
They
have all
presented
kinds of
pieces of evidence.
right.
Yeah.
But we have all kinds of testimony in Scripture that verify that Israel was in Egypt, and they were there in the time of the pharaohs, and that Abraham, existed as a person, that Jesus existed as a person. They weren't in a far-off galaxy a long, long time ago. They were in concrete places.
Yeah. And these type of things are long discussions, and many, many books written
Yes.
to suss these out.
Yes.
And
the things in the New Testament are rooted in history. In fact, even those that were not Christians, for example, Josephus.
We've talked about in quite a few videos.
Yeah, Josephus talks about the Jesus. He got like 20-something Jesuses, but he talks about Jesus of Nazareth, and he talks about the extraordinary deeds he did, and he talks about the faith of his followers, that he was raised from the dead, and he talks about all of that. And he's not even a believer, but he talks about the fact that no matter what people did, his followers seemed to multiply and expand and keep growing and doing.
Yeah.
And so...
And I wonder how much of this, there's all these philosophical aspects of what do we decide is real. At some point, this person is a person of faith, someone who believes in God. And so let's say that you've taken these steps and you believe that there are some miracles, you believe that you believe in that to some degree. How much of it gets to be, it comes down to how do I believe God functions?
Yeah.
Do I believe God set the world in motion and it's now it's going to be cause and effect no matter what? Or do I believe in a God who still plays a role and intercedes and interacts with his creation? Because if I believe in a God who's active, all of this makes complete sense to me, and
sure.
I can make work of it.
Well, I feel in the question a tension, and this tension comes when we are interacting continually with people who have different assumptions than we do. Mm-hmm. And because their assumptions are that anything that is not based on empirical research or evidence is not true. See, it's like if you choose an epistemology, if you choose a way of knowing, if you choose a methodology, then that predetermines where you're going to come out. Because if I can only look at these things and I have to ignore everything else, then I'm going to come out a certain place.
Yeah.
In many fields, for example, when my brother went to medical school, they told him if he was stupid enough to still believe in God, he needs to do something different. And there was a culture in that school that tried to persuade him not to look at anything else but the physical.
Yeah.
See, well, it seems to me like, this is a pressure from our culture to try to take these things mythically and make them parables instead of real.
Yeah.
But the God that the Bible presents is a God that reaches outside of nature, into nature, and changes things and does things that are supernatural. Now let's think about the word supernatural.
Yeah.
Natural could be exchanged for the word material.
Yeah.
Okay.
The normal, the stuff.
But
the bits and pieces.
Supernatural, you said the questioner believes in God. Well, that's inconsistent because God is supernatural. God is a spirit. God is not matter.
Yeah.
Luke chapter 24, Jesus said, a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see me have. God is a spirit.
Yeah.
So if God is a spirit and you believe in God, then you've already said that you're admitting the existence of the supernatural. If God can exist, and if God is mind and he created matter, then do you believe in mind over matter? Do you believe that the supernatural influences the natural and can change the natural. Well, that's what the Bible is the story of.
Yeah. So at that point you say, okay, I truly believe in God. I believe that the creation story happened.
Yep.
I believe that Noah and the flood happened.
Sure.
I believe that Jesus was raised from the dead, born of a virgin, all those different things.
Then it doesn't become a problem for you.
Yeah. And so I think the last thing that comes to my mind when I hear a question like that, and they're taking this idea of, oh, well, it's a story, how much of that maybe comes from the New Testament when they're hearing like Jesus is the new Adam and different things, and they see it as, well, Adam was an archetypal beginning character more than a physical person.
Okay, the biblical characters like Abraham and Adam and Moses, their lives and their experiences are used in symbolic ways in the Bible, but the Bible assumes that they were real people, even though that their stories are used to illustrate other things. Christ brought grace and life into the world, like Adam brought sin and death into the world. Was Christ real?
Yes.
Yes, and so was Adam.
Yeah.
The Bible says in Genesis 3 that Eve was the mother of all living. Well, okay.
It seems very improbable in the way that we understand the world around us, but if that's what it says...
Well, the way that we understand the world around us is influenced by secular mentality and secular philosophy that has different assumptions than the Bible has.
Yeah.
See, the secular mentality assumes materialism.
Right.
Now, we claim that we don't.
And yet.
We claim to believe in divine revelation, and we claim to believe in reason and testimony.
Yeah.
See? There's all kinds of testimony that backs up the death and resurrection story of Jesus. But, but that's supernatural, so you can't believe in that.
Yeah.
See?
And I think that's where we can look and maybe to not feel so out of the ordinary when we run up against that. You can look in the New Testament when they're talking about the Pharisees and Sadducees, and you had these Sadducees who were very religious and believed in all these things, but the raising of the dead was a step too far. I mean, they couldn't see that and understand it. So not to excuse when we have those hang-ups or whatever, but it's not a new phenomenon for religious people.
No. And please understand, this is in no way, this is a fantastic question.
Oh, yeah.
And
something many of us struggle with that in one way or the other.
And we need to be able to ask those questions, but we need to really be able to listen to the other side, the really good evidence that's on the side of believing in those things in the Bible. When you start looking at the fact that the Bible is filled with historical references that have actually been proven to be correct, well, that shows that we're rooted in history. The New Testament, people often look at it as mythical and weird and everything, but the places in it, the people in it, they're all right. Even, when Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, and the Delphi inscription, Claudius writes and says that he wants to talk to his friend Gallio, the proconsul of Achaia, and it's real stuff.
And the whole book of Luke was written by Luke, the physician, and you can look back and we know that certain things that they held have been proven untrue because we've learned more scientifically. But when you read the scientific writings of that day, they were not built on just wild assumptions. They still had their own methodology.
But Luke the physician isn't writing about physician stuff. He's writing about what happened in Jesus. He says, I'm going to give you an account of the things that have happened.
Right. But to know that a man who was a scientist, who was a physician, had bought into it, so to say,
and he could say that all these things were real.
So it lends a certain extra level of these aren't just religious zealots. This was someone who came out of even a different philosophy of way of thinking.
Yes.
And believed in these
For
things.
me, when I was a young man and I was in graduate school, and all this stuff from the materialistic liberal side was coming to me. When I say liberal, I mean people that don't believe in the supernatural and don't believe in the inspiration of the Bible. That's what I'm talking about. When it was coming at me, it boiled down to one thing for me. do I really believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ? And I examined all the evidence, all the testimony, all the facts and stuff from that time that would be for and against the resurrection, and I decided, yes, I really, honestly do believe in the literal bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. Once I had that hurdle underneath me,
Yeah.
the rest was no problem.
Yeah.
Because if God raised Jesus from the dead, which is impossible naturally.
Naturally, yeah. Which makes it a miracle, which makes it this supernatural
it is a miracle.
intervention.
Then he could sure enough put a baby in a virgin's belly, and he could do all the things that the Bible says he did because he's God. You know, so that was the thing that really was the tipping point for me, and all the evidence that went with Jesus. And another thing before we close that Brother Thomas pointed out to us a long time ago. To say that there is no God or that there is no supernatural is a statement of faith. Atheism is just as much a matter of faith as theism is. The atheist stacks up some evidence and says, well, you know, we don't really believe in that out there, but they can't prove that there is no God.
Well,
Any more than we can prove with their method that there is a God.
That's where I was in Germany years ago, and there was a atheistic bus campaign that was driving and stopping in all the town squares. And their bus said, you know, there is no God. We are 99.9% sure. You know, it's like, I mean, it was in big letters, so they don't even try to hold back on that. But
their reason is, it's really funny because their reasoning is, we're going to only examine what our five senses can see, material things. That's all we're going to even look at, and therefore we're going to come out that there's no supernatural, there's no God. However, Paul wrote, for the invisible things of God since the creation of the world are clearly seen, being perceived through the things that are made, even his everlasting power and divinity. So that being the case, can you look at the universe and look at the symmetry and design? Can you look at a DNA strand and all the programming in that and say there's no greater intelligence than man?
Who was the early scientist who said God has provided us two books? He gave us the Bible and he gave us his creation. I'll have to look up which.
The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day after day brings forth speech. Night after night brings forth knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. In other words, the creation cries out, look at me, there's got to be a God. See? So matter, in all of its design and its order, like the systems of the human body and all these that says somebody designed this. That points to a supernatural. See? So
as much as when we read these things, they seem crazy. They seem so out there. If we truly believe in a God who is active and who does all these things, and we believe in the miracles that brought us to faith, like if you believe in Jesus, you have to believe in certain things to truly believe in him.
Did he raise Lazarus from the dead, call him out of the tomb 4 days after he was put in there?
So it's all kind of part of a building block system, and you pull one and it weakens the others. So
I think those that are trying to take the miracles of the Bible mythically. In fact, Rudolf Bultmann, a German theologian, used to talk about demythologizing the Bible to find actually what happened. But that has an assumption behind it, that no supernatural things can really be true.
So it's the sort of thing where, going back to the original question, yes, Jesus told stories to illustrate a point. And yes, there are stories told in the Old Testament to illustrate a point, but that does not mean that everything we don't understand becomes a story. Because there are also miracles of Jesus.
The parables are not meant to be historical. But the accounts of what happened in the Old Testament are not parables. They're not presented as parables. They're historical.
Okay. So hopefully that gets the conversation going. I know this was one of our longer videos, but like I say, I said it jokingly, but there are books upon books upon books written on every piece of what we discussed, really.
Right.
So, if there are more things, or you heard something and you went, oh, I want them to spend a little bit more time on that, or, oh, I really don't buy into that, and you want us to cover it a little more, let us know, because this is one that we could spend a lot of time going into. But thanks for the question. It is an important one. It is a big one.
Very good one.
So thanks, Dan, as always. Thanks, everyone, for watching. We'll see you all again next week. Ba-dum, bum, 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 bum.